Hello, this is Carl Leobson, the University of Arizona, and I'm your instructor for SERP 403 and 503, Special Services in the Schools, and this is going to be a short introduction to the course, just to walk you through some of the elements that are more salient. This is Special Services in the Schools. Now, it's a combined course for undergraduates and graduates. The undergraduates are receiving this course in a hybrid mode, which means I meet with them on campus for about 90 minutes a week, and they do some online work. But for graduate students, you're taking this course completely online. For today's course, we're going to review the objectives. I'll do some introductions of myself. I'll talk about how each class session is going to be organized. And then we'll talk about how you get hold of me, what some of the course requirements are. We'll look at some online material and the quizzes, and then we'll do a review. So the objectives for today's course session are to be able to name a variety of methods for contacting the instructor, name the major graded assignments in the course, ask at least one question about the course, and successfully take and submit a quiz. I like to model good instruction while I'm teaching, because I'm usually teaching teachers, and so I always have objectives for my sessions, and then I present material that helps you achieve those objectives, and then I assess those objectives at the end. It's the kind of thing we ought to be doing for kids in schools with disabilities, and frankly for kids in general education. A little about me. I started as a classroom teacher, mostly for kids with serious and violent behavior and emotional and behavioral disorders. I worked as a district-wide behavioral consultant for several years. I have a master's degree in assistive technology and special education from the University of Kentucky, and I have a doctorate also from the University of Kentucky. And while I was working on my doctorate, I was a research associate for the National PBIS Center. My specialization is in emotional and behavioral disorders, positive behavioral support, and in simplified assessment methods for function-based interventions. If you've taken 502, 529A, 529B, that's the kind of work I do. So let's talk about the organization of class sessions. As I said, for each class session that you open on D2L, there will be objectives, there will be activities, and there will be assessments. And this will be true for the undergraduates in class also. For the graduate students taking the fully online course, each course session, there'll be a start of a session, and this semester it's on a Wednesday. It will end the next Wednesday. In between, you'll be working on the objectives, the activities, and the assessments. And the assessments, it's usually a quiz, or I ask you to post something to a discussion board. And then you move on to the next session, and we're all going to move together. So it's not work at your own pace. We'll just work week by week. So if you start on Wednesday and you get finished with everything by Saturday, I'm going to ask you to wait until the next Wednesday. It's better when we're all working together in the kind of structure we have here. For undergraduates, there are some things they'll do out of class and some in class. But for either out of class or in class, there'll always be objectives, activities, and assessments. But their assessment will be after class. Okay, so whatever they do online, they'll be assessed online. If they come to class, they'll do the assessment or the quiz or discussion post after class is over. So, how do you get hold of me if you need to talk to me? The best way to get hold of me is email. I know it's a little old-fashioned, but I'm an old-fashioned guy, and I respond to email pretty quickly. You can get hold of me by phone at the number that's listed, and you can get hold of me for office hours, either in person or by Skype, just by appointment. If you need to see me, just make an appointment. Also, when I was introducing myself, I didn't mention some of you I already know, and some of you I've been working with. Some of you I don't know. So feel free to send me an email, or please do, if I've not met you before, and introduce yourself. Or if I do know you and you just want to say hi and tell me how your holidays were, I'd appreciate that also. General course requirements. Attendance, I think, is important. I think it's important that you're actually either online or in class. Discussion posts, weekly quizzes. The discussion posts and weekly quizzes are the main portions of assessment in this course. But there are 3 projects for undergraduates and 1 additional project for graduate students. And we'll talk about what those are in just a moment. So let's take a look at those requirements a little more closely. There's usually a quiz every week. Not every single week, but most weeks there'll be a quiz. You're going to find the quizzes to be pretty simple. You know why? Because I provide objectives and I teach to those objectives, and then I ask questions that are directly related to the objectives and the content you just had. So you'll knock it all out of the park as long as you do it. The quiz will become available for the graduate students the very first day that the session opens, and it will remain open until the end of that session week. And in fact, I'll leave it open an extra week, so if someone screws up on a quiz and you want to get those points that you missed in the quiz and you want to retake it, it's fine by me. Just do it. Let me know you've done it. I'll go in and regrade it. You'll get the points. For the undergraduates, same thing. Most of the time you'll take the quiz after you come to a class session. And if you lose points on a quiz and you want to correct it, just do it. Let me know. I'll regrade it. The point of the quizzes is for me to understand what you know, not just to get you a grade. And that's something I think we ought to keep in mind about assessment as we talk in this course about progress monitoring for kids with disabilities. It's not about giving them a grade or failing them or passing them. It's about figuring out where they're at and how we can change what we're doing and making sure that they actually get the content they need. Right? I use discussion sections pretty often to get your input. That doesn't mean I need you guys to engage in a rough and tumble discussion. It's just a nicer long-term format where you can post and you can see what other people have posted, and I can go in and read and grade and make comments pretty easily. One of the projects that's required in the course is a comparison between IDEA and Section 504. They're both related to special education law and legal requirements in schools, and it's a confusing issue, and it's a confusing issue all the time. I'm married to a special education director in a charter school, and I can tell you that every week we have discussions about whether or not a child should receive an IEP under IDEA or receive a Section 504 plan. So what we ask you to do in this project is create some presentation, handout, pamphlet, or website page that would be useful to you in the future in explaining to parents, teachers, or students the differences between IDEA and 504, so that when you run into that problem, you'll have something to fall back on and to hand to people. Another thing we're going to do is develop an individualized transition plan. We won't write an IEP in this course. What we're going to do is write a transition plan. A little shorter. You don't see people require this as often. I think it's really critical. It's a legally mandated part of services to kids in special education that they receive a transition plan, or they receive some planning to help them transition into adult life. The third project is a personal philosophy of teaching in special education practice. If you're already a special education teacher or a teacher, you've probably had to write a personal philosophy of teaching. And if you're just getting started, it's something that you'll create now and that you'll continue to change throughout your career. Pretty much every teacher is expected to keep one on hand and on file. So we'll get yours rolling here in this course. And remember, if you're an undergraduate student in particular, or if you're a graduate student looking to get teacher certification, you need to hold on to all of these projects and assignments because they go into your portfolio. So when you create them, keep a folder with electronic copies for yourself. Graduate students do an additional project, which is a teacher or parent interview about legal issues in special ed. So one of the things we do to differentiate the graduate course from the undergraduate course is require an extra written product, and that is this interview with a teacher or parent. And what I'd ask you to do early on in the course, after we talk about some basic legal issues and requirements in special education, is to go to a teacher or a parent and talk to them about the problems that they've encountered in terms of the legal requirements of special education and how they deal with them. Teachers may tell you about paperwork issues, they may tell you about issues in getting meetings together, more personal issues. Parents may tell you personal issues, issues they've had with schools and with teachers and with understanding or with feeling left out of the process. So that would be like a 1 to 3 page double-spaced paper, something simple to show me that you have explored this issue with a teacher or parent. In the syllabus, you'll find the points listed for each activity. I don't know why it says 30 attendance days. It's really 15. But it is 30 points. And for undergraduate students, your total adds up to 200, not 220. If this is 220 because of the teacher or parent interview that the graduate students do. And you can see that things are pretty evenly weighted across the course. So most everything is important. Okay, that's what this suggests. That each piece of this course is pretty critical. So let's move on now and look at, well, we've already looked at the grades. As I said, the undergrad grades add up to 200. Grad student grades add up to 220. You can download the syllabus online and take a look at this yourself. And in fact, I'd encourage you to. Although I will say that in terms of the weekly schedule and when things are due and which project, I'm still playing with sessions 4 through 15. I'm making some fairly major modifications to the course, and because it's complicated, it's going to take across the semester. So while we have all the topics listed and we know what in general that we have quizzes and discussion posts and projects due, you're better off getting those specifics as we go from D2L, and I'll keep you apprised of certainly when quizzes and discussions are due. Those will be due almost every week. The syllabus, though, lists when the major projects are due. So we start out talking about the introduction to the course, that's today, and then next class session is IDEA History and Case Law and the development of special education through case law. Graduate students, you'll want to work starting with the first day of class on the 14th. I'm going to open up sessions 1 and 2, so work through 1 and 2 and the goal is for you to be finished with 2 by the 21st, okay? So work through session 1 and session 2, and I'll send you an email to remind you. And actually that's going to be true for undergraduates too. So I'm going to be out of town in Washington, D.C., actually attending a conference on legal issues in special education and getting a briefing from some of the new people on Capitol Hill about where special education procedural law is going in the next Congress. So I won't be at the next class session, so you should work through sessions 1 and sessions 2 also. Then we'll talk about IDEA and least restrictive environment. We'll have a whole session on section 504. We'll talk about FERPA, and it's on that date, February 11th, that the teacher or parent interview is due. So you got to work along fairly quickly on that. Remember, I'm not requiring a great deal, just a couple pages. Sit down and talk to somebody. Just have a heart-to-heart with them about what some of the problems are in relation to special ed requirements and procedural requirements and how they've dealt with that. Then we'll talk about IEPs and the PLAFP. If you don't know what a PLAFP is, I will leave you in suspense just so it's exciting until we get there. Then we'll do a session on IEPs. Again, we'll talk specifically about annual goals and objectives, more about objectives, annual goals. We'll talk about how that's changed over the years. It's at that session that the Section 504 and IDEA comparison is due. And I'll try to provide some more samples online about what that is. It's a side-by-side comparison, at least 6 elements of comparison showing similarities and differences between Section 504 and IDEA. Right? For example, Section 504, there is no funding support for a 504 plan. There is funding available through the federal government for an IEP through IDEA. Okay. And it can be in the form of a pamphlet that you might hand out to teachers or to parents who are in courses. You might create a short slideshow that shows 6 comparisons and explains them a bit. You could write a paper, but I prefer you create something that you could use with people in the future that you'll find useful. Or create a web page, maybe a short video. That would be great. Then we'll talk about IEPs some more. We'll talk about the timelines and due process for IEPs. We'll begin to talk about transition planning. We'll practice it. Then we'll have spring break. And then we'll come back and we'll have another session on transition planning because that's a major piece of the course. Week after that, we'll talk about personal philosophy of teaching, and we'll do a little assessment to help us develop some ideas about a personal philosophy of teaching. Then we're going to talk about, for a few weeks, about conflict resolution and consultation and about working with parents. And it's during the Working with Parents week that the transition plan is due. Transition plan is not hard to write. I will have explained it in detail. We'll have spent 2 weeks on it. We'll do some samples. I'll show you examples. It's not hard. The last 2 sessions are still kind of up for grabs. Right now, they're planned as modifying Common Core goals for IEPs, although there are some new things happening, and if something new crops up while I'm in DC talking to people on the Hill, I may make the last 2 sessions about those items. I think that might be pretty slick. And then the final week, of course, the teaching philosophy is due, although probably not on April 29th. The last day of class, I think, is the 6th, so we may extend it to give you a little extra time to get that teaching philosophy well written. One of the things we'll try to do is have you create a draft of your teaching philosophy and pair up in the discussion section and review each other's work so that you get some feedback. That's the bulk of the content, guys, for this session. Let's do a quick review. What's the best way to get hold of me? Email. But you can also call me at the number that was listed. It's my office number, but it rings through to my cell. And if you need to speak to me in person or by Skype, send me an email or give me a phone call and we'll make an appointment. Name the major graded assignments in the course. Those are listed. But in general, attendance, weekly quizzes, discussion sections, and 3 projects for graduate students, or for undergraduate students, 4 projects for graduate students. Then asking one question about the course. In the quiz for this first course session, I have a question that says, ask a question about the course. And what I'm going to do is look through all of those, find some common questions, and then post an FAQ answering some of those questions. And if there are some that aren't common but are specific and looks like you really need an answer to it, I'll try to get back to you individually. Look for some feedback in your quiz on your question. All right, even if you get all the points on your quiz, take a look at the feedback, because that's likely where I'm going to answer some of your questions, although I will post the FAQ. And then finally, successfully taking and submitting a quiz. Well, I'll know that when you actually finish the quiz. But one thing that this first session lets me do is get a sense of what you know, and the fact that you're able to get online and engage in taking a quiz, which is one of the more important features of the course. So what should you do next? Well, you should take quiz 1 online, and then course session 2 will be also open starting on January 14th. So you can start with that right away and be ready or be finished with it by next Wednesday. Right? And course session 2 is history and basics. And as I said, I'll be out of town. I'll be in DC getting briefings on the Hill. So graduate students, do the whole thing online. Undergraduates, do the whole thing online. And I'll see you after I get back. So include your questions in your quiz, or you can send me. And if you have a question you don't want to post anywhere, or you don't even want to include it in the quiz, and you want to ask me directly, something you really need, send me an email, right? Get hold of me. And here's hoping we have a really interesting and productive semester, and I'll see you again online.